presentation in English, so I will try and complete this in the given time. You know, when you talk about creating typefaces, whatever the language may be, that's a lot of area to cover. There are a lot of elements in creating fonts or typefaces for whatever the language is. And it will be very hard for us to look at every aspect of typeface creation. But nevertheless, I hope to give you an appreciation of the entire process involved in creating typefaces and why we need these typefaces, what is their role in presenting our content, and so on. So the hope is at the end of this presentation, you will have a good idea of why typefaces are important for you to present your content, your document, in a manner that invites your readers to read them. And it presents it in a way that users understand how to consume that content. Because there is an understanding between the person who is producing the document and the person who is consuming the document. And the role of transferring that information across is played by typefaces. So they play a very important role. And it's very useful if you understand the elements behind the creation and use of typefaces. So let me start with this handwritten letter. It's from a book. It's a Tamil book gifted to me by a friend in Tamil Nadu, who's also a writer, Mr. Malan. This is a compilation of letters written by Uwe Saminadeyar. I think many of you know him. He's a scholar. This is a handwriting, right? It's a letter that he wrote, with a pen on a paper in the late 20th century, right? So it's between 1877 and 1900 is where the compilation encompasses. So this is a simple letter. So why am I putting this up? I want to show you a few interesting things about this letter. Not the content. I'm not going to talk anything about content, but presentation, formatting. So if you look at this document, there is an indent in the beginning. That clearly shows the reader that that's where the entire document is beginning, the content is beginning. In this case, it's a letter. So the letter is starting with the first letter that appears after that indent. So the indent indicates that, hey, this is the start of a paragraph, start of a letter, or start of something, right? So that's communicated. That message is already embedded in there. It's not written. We are not putting an arrow in there and saying this indent, but people understand that, that's the start of a paragraph. If you look at the bottom, his signature is on the right. That's also a standard format. When people read a letter, they tend to look for the signature at the bottom right of that paper. So that's a format. And then you see that he has written some notes in a vertical orientation on the left, right? Why did he do that? He could have written that same line at the bottom of the letter, like what they do in English. You put a PS, a postscript, and write it there. But why did he have to go do that in the other way around? That's probably to attract attention. So he's emphasizing something, right? He's telling the reader, hey, look at this. I'm trying to say something very important. Please make sure you read this, right? So there's an emphasis. So all these messages are not in the letter, are not written, but they are presented in the way they are arranged on the document, right? So that's important. And formatting of the document plays a very important role in presenting our content because it actually takes for granted an understanding the presenter or the publisher or the writer or the author has with the reader. So let's start from there. Let's start from a handwritten document and why the formatting of the document is important, in addition to the content of the document. Now, this is a Tamil typewriter. You can look at it as any language, any Indian language typewriter. I mean, I've used a Bengali typewriter when I did my master's in Reading University on typeface design. So I actually typed using a Bengali typewriter. I've used a Tamil typewriter for years when I used to type my father's creative work. I've seen Malayalam typewriters. I've seen typewriters in other languages, but this were one of the early inventions and actually changed the way text was put on paper, right? Now, even if you look at a typewritten document, this is a Tamil typewritten document, again from the archives of my dad, his collection. So these are valid documents. And you also have a date on the document. I think it's in the 90s or late 90s. Yeah, it's around the late 90s. Now, I'd like you to look at some things in this document, right? The one on the left, you see there's the name of the person who's writing it on the left and the institution that he belongs to on the right. So there's some form of structure. In most cases, this is what you would see, the name of the person on the right, on the left, and the institution that he belongs on the right. So that's a structure. And every document has a title. And in this case, both the documents have their titles centered in the page. And the one on the left is underlined with a typewriter. The one on the left, the one on the right is probably underlined with a pen and a paper. But the fact is they're both underlined. And you'll see the same indent in the document on the left that says that indicates that this is the start of the main content or the content. And then in the second half of the page, you see alignments. You see some text that is centered, sometimes underlined, sometimes not, but it's centered. Now, all these arrangements of the words, on a paper communicates something. It tells you that the title actually is a summary of what the document is all about. The indent is the start place. The structure is where you go and look for familiar things that you see in a document of this nature. The centered text shows you that this is an important piece. It should not be confused with any other text around it. So we only put that text in the middle and we are centering it so that it has its own space to draw your attention. Right? Can you see the role, the positions, the alignment, the underlining, the structure of how you place those words play in conveying your content to the user? Now, the author of this document could have just written down all these words in a straight line. The reader could have still understood it. They could have still got the message. What the author wants to say would have been delivered to the users. But why do we structure it this way? Why do we follow a format that is understood by people? Why is it important for us to pay attention to all these things? That's because you need to draw the attention of the user to read the document. Once you have drawn the attention and when the user has started reading, then the role of keeping the reader in attention or keeping the reader as interest in the content is the role of the content author. If it's a story, it's a storyteller's role to keep the user wanting to continue read. But the presentation is the first impression is what draws the user towards the document. So whatever document you are working on in your university environment, whether it's a thesis, whether it's an article you're writing for a magazine, whether you're publishing a book, whatever, a compilation, the presentation is so important because that's what gives the user the first impression about the nature of the text, of that document. And without that presentation, you don't have the professional touch to the print, to the material, and it may not, or it may fail to draw the attention of people you want the document to reach out to. So why are we looking at all this? Because well-formed documents, are they organized? They depict or they dictate how words appear on a paper, on a page. They use variations of type, right, which is very important. That's the biggest role of typefaces, of fonts. They use the variations of size, alignment, spacing between the fonts, between the text, margins, indents, list items that you want to list out to clearly say these are the items that you want to talk about, or this is the table of content, or these are the events that we want to pay attention to. When you present a list, it further clarifies the intent of your content, right? Then there's the consistency and easy to access information in the document is important, because that's where the user expects to find that information. If it's going to be a start of a book, the user expects to look for the metadata about the book. If it is the first page, the author expects to look for the title, the author, the year it was published, who the publisher is. Then he expects to look for the, of course, after the metadata, he expects to look for the table of content. Then when he looks at the last few pages of the document, the user expects to see indexes. These are all consistent and presented in a way that is easy for users to access information from that document, from the book. And the lastly, as I talked about before, is visual appeal, right? It affects the reader. It's important for first impression. Otherwise, you may lose your audience completely. You may not even be able to draw them to want to read the content, let alone to figure out what the content is trying to say. So that's a little bit of history. We'll come back to history a little bit in a short while. But what about documents in the digital age? Right? Today's books, if you look at ebooks, whatever format that may be, if it's a searchable ebook, you may not even need an index page at the end, because you can just simply search for the text. So that has changed some formatting a little bit. And also, software tools allow automatic formatting of your document. If you write a Word document, if you have finished a novel or an article or a book or a thesis or an essay in a Word document, Word automatically organizes the section headings for you. In some cases, even puts up the table of contents for you. And if you need, the index can also be automatically created for you. What allows Word to do this? What allows computer software to do all this formatting? What allows them to do is the correct use of typefaces, the correct use of the heading font, the correct use of the subheading font, the correct use of the body text font. When the document detects all these fonts, it puts together all these pages, the formatting pages for you, the automatic pages for you. So you can see that fonts also play a role hand in hand with the software to format the documents for you for modern devices as well. Now, modern devices also give you infinite possibilities, right? You're no longer limited by the number of fonts a user has or a publisher has. You're not limited by the number of pages you can put into a book. You're not limited by the space available on a page, where in many books you see text that is so crammed that you can hardly have what we call in the typeface world breathing space between words. So we don't have all those limitations in the digital books. There's plenty of room for creativity. And because of this, there are many emerging formats of books, of electronic publications. And because there are a lot of emerging formats, there are also a lot of emerging expectations. You can't expect a young reader today to take a book that is published on palm leaf manuscripts and become interested in wanting to read the content. It will not, because the time has changed. Neither will he go and look at a book that was published maybe in the 19th or 20th century, because the formatting of the book is completely different. So likewise, when you have digital format ebooks, and when people start reading digital format books, their expectation of a digitally formatted book is different. So we need to pay attention to that. And the role of typefaces in these new format books, documents, is massive. It's tremendous role. So all this actually warrants elegantly designed, beautiful Indian typefaces. So that's actually a new and emerging opportunity, and I'm going to talk about some of those things in the given time today. So let's look at this in three areas. A little bit of history of how Indian typefaces came about, some challenges in designing Indian typefaces. I'll just give you one or two. It will not be technical, I'll assure you that. And then I'll look at a little bit of opportunities ahead in spite of the challenges that we face. Now let's look at history. We all know, or many of us may have read, although there are many views about this, but the general consensus is writing is a later introduction to language development in India. Right? Most of the languages in India originated as spoken languages. Writing came much later. So we may not have seen the evolution of print media or evolution of recorded history as we probably see in, say, China or in the Western Europe or in the Western countries. And when people started writing manuscripts, the tools that they used to write, the medium on which it was written, the ink that was used differed, it varied from place to place in India. So mostly in the northern area, you see a lot of calligraphic forms of manuscripts. In the south, you'll see mostly palm leaf. Though there are other mediums like copper plates and other inscriptions, but in general, books were actually written in these kind of media. And in South India, it's mostly palm leaves with a stylus, or iritani, they call it in Tamil. In northern India, it's usually a reed pen, dipped on ink and then written in a calligraphic form. And these forms of writing, this media, the kind of tools that they used in different parts of India, greatly influenced the shape of the letter forms, right? So that is why when you look at the northern Indian letters that you see on the left, the IndianManuscripts.com, you'll see some lines are thick, some lines are thin. That is because the reed pen has a width. So when you move horizontally, it is thin. When you move vertically, it is thick. But the one you see on the palm leaf, you don't see the variation in thickness. It's all uniform thickness because it was written using a stylus pen and the inscriptions are done on a palm leaf. I'll also talk a little bit about how the medium affected the letter forms in a short while. Okay, so we talked about manuscripts, right? We talked about the writing tools. In South India, they did not use the ink. They did not dip the pen on ink, but they just inscribed it, and then there was some form of powder that they spread on the palm leaf for the letters to show up. Whereas in the palm leaf above, you see that you can see the use of ink in when they inscribe that text on palm leaves. So because they were using ink, the lines and you see a lot of straight lines in that letter, a lot of straight vertical lines, and you see that the words are actually connected by a headline called the Shiroreka on top. A lot of the letter composed of straight strokes, or mostly straight strokes. Whereas in the South Indian scripts, the letters are more circular because drawing straight horizontal lines can tear the palm leaf, right? The instrument can tear the palm leaf. So you see a lot more circular forms of letters. I think many of you already know all this, right? Now, what I want to draw attention to is this interesting thing about stroke contrast. Most letter forms, whether it's in Indian or Western or Chinese, letter forms that had a calligraphic tradition where they use a pen, whatever the pen may be, that has a width, and then you dip it on ink and then you inscribe, you calligraph. You see these letters having a contrast. There are lines that are thick, there are lines that are thin. And the way you move the pen as you write the letter determines which stroke becomes thin and which stroke becomes thick. So Arabic, Latin, Devanagari, Bengali, Gujarati, Gurumukhi, or Chinese, Japanese, Korean, they all used ink and pen to calligraph, and they all have stroke contrast, right? Bengali, Devanagari, and Gurmukhi, they all have a headline, and the others don't. In fact, Oriya, they say they do have, it does have a headline, but the headline is curved because the medium of it was written was different. So there are a lot of very interesting stories. We won't have much time to go through all of those. Also, because of the influence of Sanskrit in most of these scripts, particularly in the north, you have a lot of conjuncts, which are very important when you write Sanskrit. Those conjuncts can appear in half forms, where you have two letters joining together horizontally, or in terms of stacks, where you have one letter appearing below the other without any change in size, probably condensed horizontally in the modern forms. So we see these kind of properties, this kind of attributes in the letters that were written using these tools. Whereas in the south, if you look at the Malayalam letter ka, though you can see ka with contrast, but this is the normal, this is the traditional form of writing the letter. So it's stylus on a palm leaf, rounded letters. The forms are mostly disconnected. You don't see them joining. So cursive is disjointed cursive. It's not like joined. You don't see two letters written together, three letters written together in the same form. And in Malayalam, when you write conjuncts, you actually write the letter above, and then the second consonant goes below. Both of them are written completely in their full forms, not like in Devanagari, where you have the letters merge either horizontally or vertically. Right? Also, South Indian scripts, the number of marks used on them is very little. So you don't have the anuswara where you put a dot on top, where you don't have a chandrabindu or something like that. But those kind of dotted marks are very less frequently used in South Indian script. In fact, Tamil has only one diacritic mark, which is the pulli, and even then, pulli was a later addition to the script, to the orthography. And if you look at the palm leaf here, the letters don't carry a pulli. People can read the pulli without even seeing a mark. The pulli came much later. Okay. Now, printing got introduced, I think it was in the 16th century, and the first book that was printed in India was in Goa, and it's a Tamil book called it's a Christian book, prayer book that was done in Tamil. And if you look at the front page, you see very little text, a lot of decorations, because there were not many typefaces available. This was the first typeface that was cut in Goa. And then if you look at the second page, you will see some centering of the text on the top, the first page, the second page, you see some centering of the text on the top, and then some justified text at the bottom. Now, I was told that the reason justification was done here, can you see the variations in the length of the da letter, right? Some da letters are short in the horizontal stroke of the da letter, and some letters are short, some letters are long. Now, they used what they call kashida in Arabic writing, where the horizontal letters can be lengthened or shortened in order to justify the text, so that if there's so much space between the words, you put a long one. If there's very little space between the text, you put a short one. So the end result is you see the left and the right justified. So the text is justified at both ends. Now, I was told that people do this justification because it becomes easier for them to tie the composition together. These are all composed with metal pieces, and it becomes easier to tie the metal pieces together because it now fits right into a rectangle. If the lines vary in length, it becomes very difficult to tie them together, and the formatting disappears very quickly. That's one reason justification was introduced those days. Now it has become a feature. In some ways, we tend to appreciate justified text. But you don't have to use justified text all the time. Indian languages especially, sometimes justification really spoils the format of the text. It depends on the point size, it depends on the type of typeface you choose for your document. But in general, you don't really have to justify all documents with all fonts. Now, contrast, I explained to you, as I explained to you earlier, get introduced when you use a calligraphic form. So the northern Indian letters, like the Devanagari or the Gurmukhi or Bengali, they are naturally calligraphed. So they have a natural thick and thin stroke in their letter forms. That's natural. But how did Tamil, Malayalam, and Telugu and Kannada get this contrast? If you look at a modern Tamil book or a modern Malayalam book that's printed with a lot of body text, you see that the text has some contrast where the one stroke will be thin, one stroke will be thick. How did this come about? Though the South Indians did not have a calligraphic tradition, the first letter forms were actually cut on metal in the West. I mean, one was done in Goa, that was in the 16th century, but for about 200 years, there was no active printing activities in India. And after that, when they wanted to make more typefaces, more fonts, they took some more samples and sent it to Rome to have typefaces designed and cut for Tamil. And when that came about, they saw this. Can you see that top part now? This letter forms is where they first introduced contrast. By contrast, I mean thick and thin stroke movements in Tamil. This is not native to Tamil. It's native to Latin, and that got introduced later. So it's not an influence of calligraphy, but it's an influence of this Latin punch cutters who designed this typeface and thought that, hey, this stroke should be thin, this stroke should be thick. Now, how did they decide? Like if you look at Ka, for example, the second letter in the title, how did they decide which stroke should be thin and which stroke should be thick? Now, I did some research and, to figure out what could have influenced them to introduce that variation in thickness. And this is what I came up with. This is, the letter Pa, Ya, and Va in Tamil. And the way we normally write it is like this. So all strokes are up to down, except the last stroke, which goes down to up, right? So the stroke starts from top down, and then connects to the second stroke, which also comes from top down, and then the last stroke goes up. This is how we normally write it. So if an Indian designer had designed a Tamil font, they will know that this is how it moves, and probably would have designed it the way my font looks like on top, right? Every stroke is of the same width. You probably see some difference in width where the areas where it joins other curves, but that's different. The thing is, every stroke has the same width. But how did this come about? This is what I call contrast. Can you see that the vertical lines are thick and the horizontal lines are thin? Now, if the vertical lines are thick and horizontal lines are thin, then I would probably think that this designer has actually, I missed the word car in the middle. In car, when you look at car just now, you see that the initial vertical stroke of the car, the first vertical of stroke of the car is thin. That's because the punch cutter probably thought the stroke went from down to up instead of up to down. So the rule they may have used is all strokes that go top to down are thick, all strokes that go left to right are thin, and all strokes that go from bottom to up are thin. If that's the case, how did Pa get a thick stroke? And how did Ya and Va, the last stroke, how did it become thick? And this is my theory. They probably drew the first letter like that, and they thought we will lift our pen after the horizontal stroke and then do a vertical stroke. So that's probably how it ended up being thick. But whatever the reason is, but that has become the standard. And if I go and do a thin stroke upwards at the end of pa, ya, and va, users are not going to like it because they're already used, they're already familiar with seeing the letters with this type of thickness and thin strokes. So that's a little bit of history. Now let's look at some challenges. I can go into details, but that becomes too technical, and that's probably for typeface designers. We are language professors here, so I'm trying not to get too much into the technicalities. Now let's look at some challenges. What are there? What's the big deal? Why is it so difficult, or why aren't we seeing enough number of fonts of different varieties in Indian languages? There are many, but I'm just listing down some of them. One, the number of letters in any Indian language or writing system and the combinations the letter goes through with other letters is sometimes overwhelming, right? When you do English, you probably do 25 lowercase letters, 25 uppercase letters, you're done, right? Whereas in Tamil or in Devanagari or in Malayalam or other languages, other writing systems, you just don't do ka. You have to do ku, you have to do kuanna, you have to do ki, and you have to consider many other varieties or variations of that letter, let alone Tamil. But other languages have even more variations. I'll show a few in a short while. The stroke density in Indian languages versus Latin. I'll show the first two. I'll show you some examples in the coming slides. But more than that, the demand from users to support, design, to look for good design of nice typefaces. Sometimes we just are so happy to see Tamil or Malayalam or Hindi or whatever language we speak in a computer. We are so excited that we are seeing our language, and we don't completely, ignore the fact that it has to look nice, it has to look beautiful, it has to look appealing. Or maybe we are not used to seeing beautiful typefaces because the number of the styles available in print were also limited during that time. So demand from users in wanting beautiful Tamil typefaces or Hindi the Devanagari typefaces or Oriya typefaces is not as big as people wanting beautifully designed English fonts. People want, even Chinese for that matter, has a lot of demand, or Arabic for that matter. People go after beautifully designed typefaces that suits the content that they're trying to print or present. The final point that I want to put out is typeface as an industry may not have picked up in a big way. Maybe because of all these overwhelming factors. In the initial days, it was not computers. They did not use computers to design fonts. They use, they were all designed by hand, and every letter must be crafted on metal. They make punches, and then from there they make all the slots. It's quite a challenging process, and because of that, we probably did not see that many beautifully designed typefaces, and probably because of that, the industry did not pick up in a big way. So let me cover one or two examples of the first two. All right, this is a Devanagari typeface that I'm working on right now. I'll show you some examples later on. If you just look at the k in the first letter k, and you have the e matra next to it, right? Then the second one, you have the half form of k joining with the full form of k for k, right? And it's a one glyph, one conjunct, and you see the e matra that goes up to the stem of the second k. Then you have the third one that has three-part conjunct, which is k, th, and y. And the e matra goes all the way to the vertical stroke of the y to cover the entire. So can you see the number of e matras they need to design and the number of variation forms of ka they need to design? I'm just showing you a simple example. A typical Devanagari font typeface can consist between 800 to maybe even over 1,000 different glyphs for it to be a beautiful, functional, complete Devanagari typeface. Now, when you talked about stroke density as a second point, you look at the capital letter I. and then you look at Tamil letter I, can you see the movement of the stroke, right? So sometimes this can become a challenge to design it, where, when you just do a single stroke, capital I. But, given all these challenges, do we say like, oh, why don't we just abandon all these Indian letters and just use Latin for the thing? No. For me, the beauty of any language, any Indian language, is also contributed by the letter forms. Each of them have a message to say. Each of them contains or carry with them, rich tradition and many um, years of evolution of the form. And when you read that letter, when you read a word in that Indian letter form, in whatever language, the meaning it has, the place where it touches your heart is very different. It strokes your heartstrings, not just your head strings. We are not reading it just for the information, but we also want to consume the emotion that the message is trying to carry. So I will, continue to advocate for beautifully designed Indian language letter form. So now look at some opportunities. I think it is still a green field. There's a lot of content that is competing for attention now with the emergence of mobile smartphones, big, beautiful smartphone screens, and many players trying to grab attention of their readers, of their users. Now it's time for people to make a difference. So if I'm competing with 10 other people to grab the attention of 10 million people, then I want to present my content in a way that will draw the attention of more people than it will the content from the other people. So typefaces, for me, play a very big role. When a person looks at it, they must have a draw. And for that, different types of typefaces are needed. So if you're inviting somebody for a seminar that you're going to do online, you can see that there are hundreds of seminars that are going on. You want to present it in a way that the user, hey, this looks very interesting. Let me figure out, let me go read what is this all about. The first impression that you give them is very important. Now, I've been very long involved in marketing in very big companies. And one of the magic words, one of the key mantra that we follow in marketing is, you never get a second chance for a first impression. So when you want to present your content and grab the attention of the user, the moment the user sees your content, then typefaces, and of course the way they are laid out on the page, on the content of the piece of poster or an invitation that you're putting together is extremely important. Finally, before I close, I like to show you this. I spoke at length about this. I did a full presentation on the genesis and creation of this typeface that I'm working on called Annai, which is a multilingual typeface or multi-script typeface, starting off with Devanagari, Tamil, and Latin, and then expanding into Malayalam, Gurmukhi, Gujarati, and all other languages. The motivation behind this design is to give you a feeling of informal text. You want to say something informally. You don't want to give a very formal, rigid message, but something informal, something like warm, inviting message to the reader. So that's the goal of this design. It's a single design for multiple scripts. So if somebody is doing a design that is going to encompass Devanagari, Tamil, and Latin in a single document, and when they use this, there is a harmony between all the three scripts. If you can see that no script is fighting for attention, and the entire graphics content becomes pleasant for the user to want to read it. Likewise, when I add, say, Malayalam at a later point or Telugu at a later point, it will blend beautifully, and synchronize harmoniously with the entire content. It's also used for secondary voice. For example, if you're writing a research document and you want to quote a piece of poem from somewhere, right? Or in the case of Tamil, you want to quote a Tirukkural or a line from Purananuru, and you want to make an emphasis on something. So while a user is reading your formal text in some formal typeface, and then suddenly when you switch a different typeface for the quote, for the poem, then you're actually saying it in a different voice, right? So the user knows that, okay, I'm reading something else now, the user is trying to refer to, and then it goes back to the formal content. So it gives the overall reading experience a lift, when you use beautifully designed, synchronizing, matching typefaces. You can also use this for callouts. Callouts are like bubbles when you write a bubble and say, this man said that, and you can put that in. So this is like a spoken language. When you write a spoken language, you probably use this typeface. Of course, good for posters and banners. And this presentation that I did for you today, I did the entire presentation with this typeface. So I hope that gives you an explanation of some understanding of why typefaces are important and what is involved in designing typefaces for Indian languages, and why we don't see that many typefaces in Indian languages as we'd see in, say, Latin for English or other Latin-based languages, and what the opportunity is there in front of us in growing this need, in making designers come forward to create and design beautiful Indian language typefaces or typefaces for Indian languages. So I hope that you find this presentation useful. If there's time, I'll be very happy to take some questions. Thank you, and Nandri.